In this episode of Common Ground, a Prairie podcast, we talk to Mike Jacobs, a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist who covered the flood of 1997 in Grand Forks, North Dakota, during his tenure as publisher of the Grand Forks Herald. The Red River has shaped and reshaped both of our lives. I was 12 years old in 1997. My parents had recently sold our house on Riverside Drive and moved us north to their hometown of Park River, a tributary of the Red. Although we narrowly escaped the flood, I remember how every year the Red bulged against the earthen dike on our dead-end street. I remember the cold wind that rushed through the door when my dad would step out into the twilight to join our neighbors and the National Guard on night patrol. The sandbags stacked high atop the dike to hold back the river. We sold the house the year before the dike broke, before the river swallowed my parents' starter home, white with forest green shutters, before it swallowed the playhouse my dad had built in the backyard, before it swallowed the garage where he sipped the foam from a just-cracked Miller Genuine Draft, the black and gold can shimmering in his hand, his arms covered in sawdust. The river swallowed the whole neighborhood where my sister and our cousins and friends snuck out through the chain-link fences toward the smell of chlorine that wafted from the Riverside public pool a few blocks to the west. The pool that drew us away from the dangerous undertow current of the muddy Red River that cuts the jagged, chipped-tooth border between North Dakota and Minnesota. I met up with Mike Jacobs over 25 years after the flood. For those of you from the Red River Valley, Mike Jacobs needs no introduction. His column, Always in Season, has delighted and educated readers about the birds of the northern Great Plains for nearly 40 years. If you are one of the lucky listeners getting to hear Mike Jacobs for the first time, you are in for a treat. His passion for birds and his encyclopedic knowledge of the landscapes of North Dakota are nearly unrivaled. Simply put, his affection for the lands and creatures he writes about is infectious. I met up with Mike in late September at Kelly's Slough National Wildlife Refuge. As Mike explains during our conversation, Kelly's Slough holds a very important place in the National Wildlife Refuge system due to its role in protecting shoreline birds and migratory waterfowl. It is composed of protected wetlands, grasslands, and streams that feed the Turtle River, a tributary of the Red River. It is also unique in that it shares ground, water, and airspace with the Grand Forks Air Force Base. Listen to our conversation to learn more about Kelly's Slough and Mike's passion for the birds and landscapes of North Dakota. Listen to the episode to hear what happens when Mike and I are interrupted by a mating pair of resident bald eagles. We hope you enjoy this episode of Common Ground, a Prairie podcast. Welcome to Common Ground, a Prairie podcast. Today we are very excited to have with us as a guest Mike Jacobs. And we are standing out here at Kelly's Slough, which it's west of Grand Forks on Highway number 2. And it's kind of near the Air Force Base, right? And that's sort of the idea, right? That's what we're here for. And
it's actually the water is coming from the lagoons at the Air Force.
Oh, is that right? Yeah, okay. And I recently had a chance to talk with Dr. Susan Pelagi of the UND Wildlife Lab, and she's doing some projects related to this.
That's why all of this overgrowth is here.
Okay.
She's fostering birds.
Oh, okay, so we have some bird habitat going here. It's late September in 2023. So there's some color changes that I'm noticing in some of the leaves. I've been paying attention. You know, my job is in Soil Conservation District in Walsh County. And some days it's almost literally I get to watch grass grow. And so, getting to see the seasonal change on that really slow speed transformation story is kind of a unique experience for me. So, Mike, can you just give us a little bit of background as to, your relationship to Kelly's Slough and maybe just a little bit of an introduction as to who you are and...
Well, Kelly's Slough is a very important element in the National Wildlife Refuge system. North Dakota, of course, has many national wildlife refuges. This one is especially important because it is now being managed for shorebirds. Most of the time it was regarded as a waterfowl refuge, but conditions have sort of changed to the point where shorebirds need attention. And so the Fish and Wildlife Service responded to that and lowered the level of the water to attract shorebirds. We're about maybe 2 weeks behind the big autumn migration. In late July, most of August, this place is literally covered with a big variety of shorebirds. The major attraction is thousands, maybe tens of thousands of avocets.
Oh, wow, yeah.
It's also a very important stopover place in the springtime, of course, but it's because water is more scarce in the fall. This is the place where an awful lot of shorebirds show up.
Yeah.
It also attracts waterfowl, and it's got pretty good grassland habitat as well. So it's in some ways an example of everything that North Dakota has to offer, except hills.
Yeah, sure, yeah. There you go. Well, you know, the joke that I'd always carry with me when I was out in different parts of the country is, at least in my part of North Dakota, which is, you know, I claim the Red River Valley, it's been bulldozed so flat by the glaciers of Lake Agassiz that you can watch your dog run away for 2 weeks, you know. It's a, it's a very flat land country. And yet, you know, now that I'm up in Walsh County, we do have the Red River Valley for about half of our county, but the western half is the Prairie pothole region. It's the Prairie wetlands region.
The whole environment here is much more complicated than casual visitors ever realize. You know, even between here and Grand Forks, which is, you know, about 20 miles, I guess, maybe not quite that. There's a whole different variety of habitats, particularly of soil types, which is not something that you think about when you're thinking about birds particularly, but it does make a great big difference in what sort of wildlife are using specific habitats. This place is, as I said, basically intended as a refuge for waterfowl.
Yeah. Well, and I was telling you before we started that I have a PhD in American literature from the Ohio State University, but in the last 7 months, I'd say that I was getting maybe an even more advanced degree in soil. I mean, it's a really complicated and humbling field of study, you know.
I might be exaggerating a little bit, but I would guess that of the 70,000 people who live in Grand Forks, 68,000 of them have no idea that just a few miles away, you know, less than a half an hour drive, you have a completely different landscape, a wholly different ecosystem than the one that prevailed in the Red River Valley and prevails now, because of course the Red River Valley is probably pretty close to 95%, maybe more, cultivated.
Yes, yeah, I mean, it really is. And you know, I've been actually going back and looking at the journals of like Alexander Henry and these kind of early explorers of the region, and the description of landscape and wildlife, of, you know, the teeming with bison and elk and bear, and you know, it's not that long ago. I mean, it seems like it's in distant past, but that's really not that long ago for that to, you know, have been the case, you know. So I guess I might be burying the lead here, which is a cardinal sin with a former newspaper person, but can you tell us a little bit about your history as a journalist, and I guess, you know, that the connection to the Herald?
I guess I never really thought I would be anything other than a newspaper man. And of course I never have been anything else but a newspaper man. So I had a pretty close to 60-year career in newspapers all over the state, but mostly in Grand Forks. I came here as a reporter, I wrote editorials, and then I became a city editor. That's the assigning editor, the person who dispatches the troops. And then I became managing editor and editor in 1984, I guess. And then, of course, the rest is essentially history. I was here for the flood and that epic adventure, and retired on April 1st of 2014 in the teeth of a spring blizzard. it was astonishing. My wife had retired from UND a year earlier, and she was on it. We were living at the time at what we called Magpie Ridge, west of Gilby. And she wasn't able to come to the party because of the snow and the storm. And I was stranded in town for a couple of days, in town meaning in Grand Forks.
Yeah.
So yes, it's been an adventure. I've continued writing something that I call Always in Season, which is it's a column about birds mostly, not exclusively.
Yeah.
But mostly, and I guess I've been doing that probably for 40 years.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm kind of associated with the birding community in Grand Forks.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to embarrass you, but I find it to be a phenomenal column. I mean, it's such a fun read. The passion that you have for birds is so clear and evident. But I also learn every time I read. It's a learning experience.
Yeah, I hope that's true, and I hope that, and I think that I have pride enough to believe that a lot of people have come to birds through the column.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I wholeheartedly would believe that, and we'll definitely link to the column in the podcast here. I guess I have a couple of questions to get us to thinking a little bit more about your column, but to start with, how did you become a birder, and like how did that happen?
I'm not conscious of having become a birder. I grew up in Montreal County in the northwestern corner of the state. My dad was a pretty keen outdoorsman and knew the names of a lot of birds. They were not the names that appear in the bird books, but names that he had picked up along the way. He often called my attention to various kinds of things that were going on. But the real turning point, I think, took place in Kenmare, which is a famous spot in American birding lore. The American Birding Association was founded there. A doctor and his wife were very active birders, and just by happenstance, Dad had a small, in addition to the dairy farm, he had a trucking business, and we had a job in Kenmare. We were emptying out a locker plant, and when we got the unbearably heavy equipment out of the locker plant, we went over to the drugstore in Kenmare, and they had a copy of Roger Tory Peterson's Field Guide to the Birds, and Dad bought it for me, and so I had that really high quality introduction from somebody who was interested in birds and watched for them, had an understanding of the rhythm of the seasons, and called my attention to them. He was also a hunter, a waterfowl hunter, and he always took the time to point out how beautifully colored the waterfowl are. So that's where the initial impetus came from.
Yeah, recently, because we're also working on a watershed and wildlife documentary up in Walsh County, and I've been out in the Prairie pothole region, and kind of for me it's been a homecoming, coming back to the region, and I am just once again fully back in love with the colors of the waterfowl, like the bill of the ruddy duck, that blue bill, or the little coots when they're young and they have the crown of like orange and pink, and it's such a beautiful spectacle of color.
I think an unfortunately large proportion people don't really notice that. And so I try to, in the column, call attention to these features, and it's those, in many cases, it's those little plumage hints that get you to knowing what the bird is, and then understanding what its role in the greater environmental scene is.
Well, and so one of the things that stands out for me about the column is that you also include drawings. That you also include these drawings.
There's a story behind that too.
Yeah. So I'm wondering, what is the story behind the drawings?
When I first started the column, the column actually arose from a course at the American Society of Newspaper Editors. One of the editors who was there, this was for city editors, managing editors, one of the editors who was there from a newspaper in Pennsylvania had a columnist who wrote a diary, an outdoor diary, and so I just copied that idea, and initially that's what it was. I would have, the blackbirds arrived today or whatever, but it soon became apparent that wasn't sufficient to get the message across. At first, the drawings were provided by the Herald staff artist, but he left, and there were no drawings for several years. And then when I became publisher, gave up the editor's spot, the woman who came in to be the editor said, you have to have drawing. So I started doing the drawings. What else?
Yeah, sure.
And they've improved a little over time. I don't claim that they're great, but they do the job, and a phenomenal number of people comment on them. So I don't really feel free. This is the trouble with newspapering. You're not ever really free because you have to meet the damn deadline. And you have to fill the space and all of that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But they've turned out to be very popular, and I get requests to print a bunch of them up, which I've always resisted. That's really not what they're for.
Sure. Yeah.
They're not meant to be decorations.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
They're not meant to be artwork.
Yeah.
They're meant to be representational drawings of the birds in question.
Sure.
And that's the whole point of it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it genuinely reminds me of some of the early naturalists and ornithologists and the Audubons of the world. The efforts to try to draw what you're noticing, and
I'm not a photographer, bird photographs would probably be in some ways superior, but the advantage of the drawings is you get to emphasize the things that set each individual species apart. So you can leave out some of the details and get away with it, whereas the photograph is incredibly intricate and complex, and the drawings don't have to be that way.
Yeah. Well, I have a sort of a two-part question building on the drawings. And I guess because I've dabbled in drawing myself, when I was at Ohio State, they have the largest comic book and cartoon library in the world, and so I kind of ended up becoming reacquainted with my early love of comics and cartoons, and dabbled in drawing. And I found that reacquainting my hand and my eye and my senses with drawing, it did help or change the way that I saw the subject.
Yeah, there's no question.
And so I'm curious what you would say about that in your relation to birds.
Not every bird is as easy to draw as every other bird.
Yeah.
Which you find out pretty quickly. I don't monkey around with background very much. The intent of the drawings is to help people to identify the birds. Period. End of story. So I don't spend very much time with the backgrounds. You have to color in something because otherwise it would just be a gray space on the page. But I'm mostly interested in those features of the bird that people are going to notice and remember, so that if they look at a picture of an avocet, for example, a drawing of an avocet, they're going to remember that coral-colored head and the long neck and the absurdly long bill and the beautiful black and white plumage. You know, and the avocet's easy, of course. You know, it's just such a striking bird. But that works for you know, there are what, 24 kinds of sparrows in North Dakota, and every one of them is just enough different that you can pick them out if you get a good look at them.
Yeah. It occurs to me that in your column, I think one of the things that I feel, and you know, maybe this is something I'm picking up on that isn't happening for you, but in my experience of reading your column, it feels like I'm both being taught and I'm among a learner, somebody who is in the process of learning.
Yeah. There's a lot to learn. You know, the professional ornithologists have a different approach than I do. They're banding and tagging and, you know, dissecting and recording and all that. You know, I'm not doing any of that. You know, not because I don't think it's important, but because it's not what I'm in it for. I'm a journalist. I'm looking for the big picture most of the time. Now the big picture needs details, but I'm not down in the weeds counting fleas on, you know, bird plumages. You know, there are people who do that.
Sure, yeah. Yeah.
So
behind us, looks like we have some bald eagles. Is that
the
what
resident eagles.
Yeah, that's really something.
I expect to see eagles, and I certainly could see eagles every day if I went out every day to look. These guys are giving us quite a show.
Yeah.
You know, in the 90% of certainty that this is a breeding pair. They're clearly adults. They're both have the fully white head and tail. There are probably within 5 miles of here, there are probably 5 or 6 bald eagle nests every year. In recent years, of course.
Yeah, and it's something to really marvel at for me, I guess. Just the size of a bald eagle nest is really like just something that is magnificent. The other week, I went out to do some interviews in Bismarck and Valley City and things, and I saw on interstate just the most enormous. It looks like I could park a car in one of these nests. You know, it's just an enormous nest. It's really something to see them.
They use them over and over and over and over again until the tree collapses, basically.
That's really something. Yeah. Well, you know, one of the things that I've noticed about my own kind of budding relationship with birding is that pretty quickly I have gone from noticing them as species to individuals, you know, where I can recognize the species. You know, when I'm in Connecticut, there's the gray catbird and the cardinal and these different species that are showing up. But the more that I am waiting for them and noticing them, the more that I notice that gray cardinal or that gray catbird and that cardinal, right? I'm wondering how that goes for you.
I try not to get on personal terms.
Sure, yeah, sure, yeah.
With individual birds, you're always going to be disappointed because nature is, you know, red in tooth and claw, and so I've often been disappointed. I have kind of an affection for mourning doves, but mourning doves build the flimsiest of nests, and you know, some high percentage of mourning dove nests are destroyed. You know, I would say 3 major causes. Wind is one, cats are second, and predators, bird predators are third. So the mourning dove population is under enormous pressure.
Sure.
Before it gets to hunting season.
Yeah,
So,
sure.
So
No, yeah, yeah, totally makes
So
sense.
I have many times in my life, set out to watch a mourning dove family,
Mm,
and they've just disappeared.
yes.
So
Yeah, that's poignant.
yeah, so I
Yeah,
don't, as I say, I try not to get too personally
sure.
involved.
Yeah, there you go. I guess one of the things that I'm interested in, coming back to your life as a journalist, what have you learned from your years in covering birds?
One thing is that people are enormously interested. Um, this was a big surprise to me. Uh, you know, birders were sort of eccentric, and people were, well, birders were, we were always very self-conscious. I still am, after a lifetime of it. But it turns out that people really are interested in what's out there, and they really do appreciate some guidance in working through these bird species. So now it's not at all unusual for me to be walking down the street and somebody will stop me and say, I saw this, can you help me out? And this is not a person who's got a particularly deep interest in birds or the outdoors. It's somebody who's seen something that interested him or her.
Yeah.
So,
You know, in my, I've thought about some of these questions myself, and in some ways it's because I'm a writer who loves to carry a notebook and loves to have a pen with me, and birds are a good reminder to notice, where I am and what I'm. They are very helpful to me in that way, in that they almost literally are calling attention to
sure,
themselves and
yeah,
displaying,
exactly, yeah.
and then I start to notice so many other things around them. Yeah, I wonder if that's part of it.
One really good example of this is Tom Clifford, who was for many years associated with the University of North Dakota, was the president of the University of North Dakota. And he developed an interest in crows. And crows, of course, are wily birds, and they're capable of quite astonishing things. But he became, I would say, deeply interested in crows. And this is not somebody who was particularly interested in nature. And of course, crows are very much more numerous now than they were not very many years ago. They've a lot of people in Grand Forks think they're a nuisance. They've got their place. There'd be a lot more garbage in Grand Forks without the crows.
Yeah,
That's what I tell people.
you know, I'm really interested in nuisance species, or the ones that we consider to be nuisance species. The coyote, the raccoon, the urban coyote, the urban raccoon, the crow. Part of that is that when I was an undergrad at North Dakota State University in Fargo, I had the chance to go with an ecology class. There was like 12 of us that got selected to go to Yellowstone and work on the reintroduction of the gray wolf project for a bit. And we didn't only spend our time working with wolves, we also got to learn about ravens and crows and all these other species. One of the things, crows are just very intelligent, and they can do all these mischievous things. It occurs to me that there's these charismatic species that we're using in conservation, so like the meadowlark for the North Dakota Meadowlark Initiative. There's the North American Grouse Partnership, and grouse, of course, do that elaborate display. But then there's these kind of maligned species. I don't know what to make of that or what to do with that. But I guess I'll turn that into a question by just wondering about, here we're protecting the shorebirds at Kelly's Slough. What makes a shorebird something that people can get excited about protecting? Or
They are by far the most challenging group of birds for identification. Some of them, of course, like the avocet is the poster child of this, are readily identified and strikingly beautiful. But there's a whole range of shorebirds that are very tricky, very tricky, and usually can't be identified by somebody carrying a pair of binoculars. You need a spotting scope. So I'm no shorebird expert. I'm interested in them partly because they have adapted to a really pretty harsh environment. And they play around in the mud all the time. They range from beach roamers, the Atlantic beaches have all these different kinds, to shorebirds that are nesting in grasslands. And so they're a fascinating group of birds. It's hard to get people to launch onto them because they become more and more difficult to identify the deeper and deeper you get into them.
Sure. So is that something that sort of breeds like a particular kind of birder, I guess?
Birders come in various flavors. There are the life listers who, goal is to see X number of species in North America or X number of species in the world or whatever in North Dakota. I have a life list, but it's a mess, and I'm not in it to rack up the greatest number of species. I want to look at something and think, this is a piece of nature's handiwork that's unique to itself, and it has its specific space and spot, not spatially necessarily, but in the layers that make up an ecosystem. All of that's really fascinating. How things are connected.
Yeah.
It's not for me collecting a list. I have lots of friends who are listers, and I don't begrudge them. I'm not in this to have the longest bird list.
So I guess to follow that, what are you in it for as a birder and then as a birding journalist? Somebody who's writing about
Well,
birds.
I want to know how things are connected, and they are connected, and things have their place. I mean, I'm taking a weekend off. I'm going to go west, and friends from Bismarck are going to come up. We're going to J. Clark-Seiler National Wildlife Refuge, and we expect to see 1.5 million snow geese. It's just a phenomenon. It's a phenomenon. Just the way those two eagles that flew by here, a few minutes ago, are a phenomenon. I find that enlarging, and I feel like it meshes me in the world in a way that doesn't happen when you're not going looking for 1.5 million geese. Now, I don't know that we'll see 1.5 million, but I can say with fair confidence that I have driven from Grand Forks to Bismarck and seen 1.5 million snow geese.
Yeah.
It's one of the great phenomena of North Dakota.
The desire to see how things are connected, I mean, there might not be a better symbol of that than our migratory birds here on the prairie that really do make this a common ground.
There are birds that nest here in that tree over there, let's say, a Swainson's hawk, goes to Argentina for the winter. It's astonishing. And that's not really all that record breaking. I mean, there are birds that nest in the Arctic who go to the tip of South America in the winter. The whole process of migration and the whole expenditure of energy, that early naturalists didn't believe it. The guy who wrote The Natural History of Shelburne believed that swallows must hibernate in the cliffs along the coast of England.
Yeah.
And he was pretty serious about it, as far as you can tell from his writing.
Yeah.
People believed for a long time that hummingbirds rode on geese across the Gulf of Mexico. No, they're tough little creatures. So you just have to understand how remarkable they are. And here is this, in the case of the hummingbird, this ridiculously tiny organism that's doing these astonishing things.
Yes.
It's humbling.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, it's hard not to, for me, I guess, to not be moved by the more that I invest in learning about migration.
That's exactly right.
I mean,
that's exactly right.
because it's so intricate and delicate and arduous. I mean, it's almost on. I can't wrap my brain around how much a bird has to do.
There's a species of crane in Eurasia, in Asia really, that migrates across the Himalayas. And this creature is venerated in the cultures of Central Asia, north of the mountains, and it's venerated in the cultures of the Indian subcontinent on the south end of the mountains. So it's an organism that has attracted the attention of human beings in almost, well, in this case, really a religious way. It's become a sacred symbol to.
Well, and I mean, it makes sense to me that birds do appear so often in sacred texts, in religious practice, and that there is that spiritual component to birds and birding. I guess one of the, in gesturing here maybe towards a conclusion, what are some of the, I guess what are some of the enduring lessons for you from spending time observing birds in the prairie? Is there anything that you feel that it's like an enduring lesson that you've learned from that?
I suppose so, but I just feel like every day when I go out, I'm going to learn something new. And we just moved from a place in the country where we had deliberately let the place go, because I wanted cover, to an urban lot with a big house on it. And so my birding experience is completely changed. I walk out the door, I try to walk every day, and I'm just always curious what I'm going to run into, and I'm quite often surprised. I really got into purple martins this summer. I'd seen purple martins, but I'd never really become acquainted with them. But probably every purple martin in North America lives in a house that's provided by humans. It's a phenomenon. And of course they're colonial. I mean, they nest together, but they spread out, and so you can be weeding your squash, and the purple martin comes floating by. Well, that's interesting. What's he doing over here? Things continually change. One of the phenomena that has kind of gripped birders in Grand Forks is the sudden increase in turkey vultures. There were no turkey vultures. There's certainly 30 years ago, probably not 20 years ago. I mean, there's been a nesting colony in the Pembina River Valley in Manitoba for quite some time, but it never really expanded. And then all of a sudden, we began seeing not one or two, but flocks of turkey vultures. And I think those of us who pay attention are dead certain that they're nesting in Grand Forks County and in Walsh County, but nobody knows where. They typically nest in cavities. Broken down barns are a good possibility, but I've never found one. And so far as I know, no one's found a turkey vulture nest in Grand Forks County, but they're here all summer long. They've got to be, I mean, it just defies the breeding bird list is one that you keep thinking is, you want to enlarge. So that would be probably the bird that is next to appear on the breeding bird list for Grand Forks County.
Sure. Well, and I spent almost all summer planting trees in Walsh County, and we planted about 500 acres of prairie grass or conservation cover grass this summer, and I saw them everywhere we went. It's a big county, it's all over the place, and everywhere we went, it seemed like they were around. And that's another interesting bird, any of the vulture family,
Well, yeah, they're sort of, people don't like them very much because they're carrion eaters.
Yes.
But what the hell? Bald eagles are carrion eaters.
Yes. Yeah, isn't that something? One of our most revered birds, and literally the symbol of our nation state is a carrion eater. And then can you imagine? A United States symbol with the vulture, I mean, the turkey vulture, that's an interesting, So they really do have symbolic power. I mean, birds really do have that. And yet, there's almost nothing that can clean carrion. I don't think there is anything that can clean carrion better than a vulture.
Of course not.
It's designed to do that.
And they are uniquely well suited to find it.
Yeah.
And to eat it.
Yeah. And I suppose that is where the aversion to them must be. Yeah, the fear of mortality and death. And one of the questions that I have, what would you recommend to somebody who's just starting out or just becoming interested in local birds, or you know, what do you need to do, or what's a good first step in becoming a birder?
Well, I always recommend that people join a bird count, a Christmas bird count. It's a nice way to spend a December day, January day. I've become addicted to eBird. Better birders than I are reporting sightings. The North Dakota bird list has grown quite significantly since eBird came along, and people who bird competitively are finding species that we never imagined would show up in North Dakota. The rare bird report on the eBird site is astonishing almost every day. Neotropic cormorants, for God's sake, they're virtually unknown north of Mexico, well, and the Louisiana coast and the Rio Grande Valley, but here they are in the James River Valley in North Dakota. What the hell?
Yeah.
What's going on here?
Yeah.
I regard it as a near occasion of grace to see a bird, to recognize a bird, and to understand that this creature has its spot in the natural world.
Yeah, a near occasion of grace. I love that. That's wonderful. One other thing I wanted to just come back to, I love your response to the question of the enduring lesson of the prairie. Sounds like it's still happening. In other words, it's the fact that it requires you to get up every day and be willing and open to learn something new.
I'm not a pessimist. I think that the natural world responds to conditions. Now, we have stressed it beyond, what's appropriate. It's not even the right word. And we have created existential threats for many species, and we're losing species. A lot of birds are adapting. A lot of species are adapting in ways that we would never have imagined. So we just the bald eagle is actually a really good example of this. When we made space for eagles moved into it. So it's not that they were avoiding us. It's that the habitat was not appropriate for them. But now, I could almost guarantee you that you could find a bald eagle inside the city limits of Grand Forks and East Grand Forks any day of the year.
Wow.
Particularly really cold winter, they might go down to Gavin's Point because there's no open water. That's another thing people don't understand about bald eagles, is that they do depend on open water.
Yeah.
So, as long as the deer gut piles are out there, they're going to be able to sustain themselves.
Yeah.
As long as people are running into deer on the highway, they're going to be able to sustain themselves.
Yeah.
Whether we like to think of them in that way or not.
Yeah. Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
So I'm not a calamity howler. I have been a calamity howler at some points in my life, but I think we're getting better. I think that in general we are recognizing what we've done, and we're trying to find ways to undo it. And this is a prime example.
Yeah. Yeah.
Kelly Slough is here initially because hunters wanted waterfowl. But the waterfowl crisis is pretty much over, not entirely, but pretty much. And so it's been repurposed for a whole different suite of birds. Ducks still use it, geese still use it, but it's really, really important to a whole range of shorebirds and that we can now find in Grand Forks County that we wouldn't have.
Yeah.
Avocets actually are this is the far eastern edge of the avocet range, pretty much.
One of the things that's been inspiring to me, I guess, is some of the almost curmudgeonly writers of the new agronomy kind of world, the new farming world. of like West Jackson and Wendellberry, and
Curmudgeons.
they're kind of curmudgeonly, and I guess there's something about them that they remind me kind of my grandpa, or some of that generation. But they like to say that hope is a 4-letter word with its sleeves rolled up, and I like to think the same is true for the work that we have ahead of us in conservation. And it also reminds me of that Emily Dickinson line of hope is a thing with feathers.
Yeah, and one of the reasons that I encourage people to be interested in birds is that it does help them appreciate what's happening. Every new building lot is a radical change in habitat. So I think we just need to be aware of that.
And for me in closing, and then I'll give you a chance to say our true closing lines here, but the podcast is called Common Ground, but it occurs to me that common air is another way of thinking of this. There's several states that claim the Wright brothers, and our ability for human flight, but this location is a good reminder that sharing the airspace, we're always sharing the airspace with birds, and even that we have the commercial air and the Air Force here, the Air Base, kind of interested in thinking about that complex problem.
The burrowing owl sighting at the airport was, a perfect example of this, because the security at the airport was very worried that there would be some sort of catastrophic collision between the owls and the airplanes. And my response was, the owls are smarter than that.
Yeah,
Yes.
sure.
And to my knowledge, none of them perished in that way. I don't guarantee that.
Yeah,
There's always mortality
sure.
among birds, but that pair brought off at least 7, maybe more, young.
Yeah.
In a place where burrowing owls have not been known to nest for at least 20, maybe 30 years.
Yeah.
So that's just an astonishing development.
Yeah. If you were to assemble a symphony chorus of birds based on birdsong, maybe particularly birds that are of North Dakota, but you can choose any of your liking, which would you choose?
I thought this was a great question, and I spent quite a lot of time thinking about it. So, my symphony would open with sharp-tailed grouse drumming, and they would soon be joined by 1.5 million geese calling, and the geese would quiet down, and the robins would start calling, and then we would have a little bit of an interlude where the prairie sparrows would be buzzing around. And then, getting towards sunset, the meadowlarks would take over. And they would really steal the show. And then, just as the meadowlark chorus was quieting down, the crows would come, cawing, and we would fade out. With a great horned owl calling in a shelter.
That is a beautiful, beautiful. Oh man, I need to hear that bioacoustic soundscape.
But actually, any bird would be welcome to join.
Sure. Well, I feel like I could keep talking with you for hours out here, but I don't want to keep you. I really appreciate you taking the time to come and talk with us today. We'd love to keep in touch, and definitely we'll keep reading the Always in Season. Mike Jacobs, thank you so much for being with us here on Common Ground, a Prairie podcast, and we'll close with that.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Common Ground, a Prairie podcast. We hope that you enjoyed our conversation with Pulitzer Prize winning journalist and bird enthusiast Mike Jacobs. For more stories about the birds and landscapes of the Northern Great Plains, we encourage you to read Mike's column, Always in Season, published every Saturday in the Grand Forks Herald, available in print and online. To learn more about Kelly Slough National Wildlife Refuge, visit the U.S. Fish and Wildlife website at fws.gov youtube.com/refuge/Kelly's-Slough. The links to Mike's column and Kelly's Slough are available in the show notes on our website at walshcounty1938.com under the podcast tab. We hope that this episode inspires you to grab your notebook and a pair of binoculars to start your own birdwatching adventure. The best place to start is your own backyard. If you want a little more advanced tools for your birdwatching adventures, consider downloading some of the great birding apps available on your smartphone, such as the Merlin app from Cornell University, which allows you to record and identify bird sightings by birdsong, or quiz your own birding knowledge with the Larkwire app. Download the Audubon app to have your own portable field guide with you wherever you go, or keep track of your own life list of bird sightings with eBird. For those of you looking to go beyond your own backyard, Kelly's Slough is well worth the visit. The Refuge is a short 15-minute drive on Highway number 2 west of Grand Forks. The best time of year to visit is late July and early August, when you can see a wide range of migratory shorebirds, including the American avocet, willet, marbled godwit, and upland and spotted sandpiper. It is also a great location to spot grassland birds, waterfowl, and raptors, such as the breeding pair of resident eagles that joined Mike and I during our conversation. Stay tuned for our next episode of Common Ground, a Prairie podcast, when we talk to 3 incredible guests about the important roles that charismatic birds and ranchers play in grassland restoration here in the northern Great Plains. Our guests include Amanda Boer of the Audubon Great Plains, Jody Provost of the North American Grouse Partnership, and Heather Husband of the North Dakota Meadowlark Initiative. To learn more about our bird photo contest and prizes, check out the podcast webpage under the podcast tab on our website, walshcounty1938.com. You can also find our contact information, including how to reach us on Facebook, Instagram, and by email on our own contacts page at walshcounty1938.com. Funding for this podcast has been provided by a generous grant from the North Dakota Natural Resources Trust. If you or your organization would like to be a supporter of our efforts for educational outreach and on-the-ground conservation here in the Northern Great Plains, please contact me at josh@walshcounty1938.com. Our theme music is inspired by Mike's description of the Prairie Symphony, including the songs and calls of sharp-tailed grouse, snow geese, the American robin, prairie sparrows, Sprague's pipit, western meadowlark, American crow, and the great horned owl. Until next time, this is Josh Anderson signing off for Common Ground, a Prairie podcast.